My mother-in-law wants me to testify that she's a fit guardian after she told me she had enough money and connections to take my children whenever she wanted. My mother-in-law, Layla, told me she could take my kids anytime she wanted because she had the money and lawyers to prove I was unfit. Said it right to my face at Thanksgiving dinner. My husband Paul had just gone to get more wine. She leaned across the table and whispered that one phone call to her judge friend would start custody proceedings. That she'd been documenting everything. I let the kids eat cereal for dinner sometimes. How I worked full-time instead of staying home. I was too young and too poor to raise her grandchildren properly. My daughters were sitting right there, 6 and 4 years old, playing with their mashed potatoes while their grandmother threatened to steal them. I told Paul that night. He said his mother was just protective. Said she didn't mean it. Said she was adjusting to being a grandmother. Said I was taking it too personally. But I saw how she watched me after that. Taking photos when the kids had messy faces. Writing notes when I was 5 minutes late to pick up. Asking the girls if mommy ever left them alone. If mommy had strange friends over. If mommy gave them medicine when they weren't sick. She was building a case. I stopped going to her house. Stopped answering her calls. Paul would take the girls over on Sundays while I worked my shift at the marketing firm. Layla would send them home with new clothes, expensive toys, stories about how much better life would be at Grandma's big house. How Grandma had a pool and a playground and horses at the country club. How Grandma could buy them anything they wanted. My 6-year-old started asking why we couldn't live with Grandma instead. I knew I had to protect us. Started my own documentation. Every threat Layla made, every inappropriate gift, every attempt to undermine me. I also went back to school at night. Got my MBA while Paul complained about having to watch his own children. Started applying for better jobs. Landed a position as marketing director at a tech company. Doubled my salary. Bought a house in a better school district. Layla hated it. Said I was working too much. Said the girls needed stability. Said career women made terrible mothers. Said Paul should divorce me and let her raise the girls properly. Paul started agreeing with her. That was 3 years ago. I filed for divorce first. Got an excellent lawyer with my new salary. Layla tried to interfere, submitted a letter to the court about my unfitness. The judge threw it out, told her grandparents have no standing unless parents are proven unfit. Told her to stop wasting the court's time. I got full custody. Paul got every other weekend, but usually skipped them. Too busy living in his mother's pool house. Too busy letting her take care of him like he was still 12. The girls thrived without the constant undermining. Straight A's, soccer stars, student council, happy kids who didn't question if their mother was good enough anymore. Layla tried everything to see them. Showed up at school. Called the principal, claiming I was neglecting them. Called child services with anonymous tips. Every investigation came back unfounded. Every attempt got her further from the girls. Last year, she was banned from school property after causing a scene at the spring concert. Then last week, Paul died. Drove drunk into a highway barrier. Layla's golden boy is gone at 38. Left nothing but debt and empty bottles. The funeral was yesterday. Layla cornered me afterward. She needed my help. She was contesting Paul's cousin for control of the family trust. Millions of dollars that Paul's grandfather had left. But the trust required the guardian of Paul's children to sign off on any distributions. That was me. She actually grabbed my hand and squeezed it. Said we were family. Said the girls needed their inheritance protected. Said she'd make it worth my while. $1 million for me if I testified that she'd been a devoted grandmother. That she'd always put the girls first. That Paul wanted her to have control of the trust. Without my testimony, the cousin would likely win. He had documentation of Layla's harassment, of the restraining order attempts, of Paul's drinking problems that she enabled. She needed me to lie under oath, to save her, the woman who tried to steal my children. I told her I'd think about it. She called hourly for 3 days. I picked up my phone the second I got home from the funeral. Caroline answered on the third ring. I told her I needed to understand what power I actually had here. She said to come to her office tomorrow morning. First thing, this couldn't wait. I sat at my kitchen table that night after the girls went to bed, pulled up my laptop, started searching for Elias Swain. Found his nonprofit website within minutes. Recovery Bridge Foundation. Treatment programs for people who couldn't afford rehab. Scholarships for sober living houses. Job placement services. His photo showed a man in his 40s with Paul's nose but none of Paul's weakness around the eyes. The About page said he'd been sober for 15 years, that he'd lost his brother to addiction. Except Paul wasn't his brother. Paul was his cousin. I clicked through page after page. Testimonials from people who'd gotten clean through his programs. Financial reports showing every dollar accounted for. Board members who actually worked in addiction medicine instead of just writing checks at charity galas. The doorbell rang Saturday morning. I opened it to find 3 Amazon boxes stacked on my porch. all addressed to the girls. I brought them inside. My 9-year-old came running down the stairs, asked if those were from Grandma. I said yes. She wanted to know why Grandma kept sending presents, why Grandma called every day, why we never saw her anymore. My 7-year-old stood behind her sister, both of them watching me with Paul's dark eyes. I knelt down, told them we were handling some paperwork about their dad. Grown-up business about money. They didn't need to worry about it. My 9-year-old asked if Grandma was mad at us. I said no. Grandma just needed some time. The presents kept coming. Video games, art supplies, a bicycle that barely fit through the door. Layla was building a paper trail, making it look like she was the devoted grandmother who showered them with love while I kept them away. Caroline's office was downtown in a building with marble floors and lawyers' names on brass plaques. She had my file waiting, 3 inches thick from the custody battle. She spread the trust documents across her conference table, pointed to Section 12. Guardian consent required for any distribution over $500,000. That was me. I was the guardian. Without my signature, Layla couldn't touch the money. Caroline flipped to another page, showed me the clause about fitness determinations. The judge would consider testimony about the relationship between the trust beneficiaries and the proposed trustee. My testimony about Layla's behavior toward me and the girls would carry serious weight. Caroline pulled out the folder from our custody case. The letter Layla had submitted calling me unfit. The statements she'd made to child services. The school incident reports. Caroline said this was exactly the kind of pattern that would concern a judge about someone controlling millions of dollars. Someone who used money and connections as weapons. Someone who couldn't respect boundaries or accept that she didn't have the right to take other people's children. I couldn't sleep that night. Kept seeing Layla across the Thanksgiving table, hearing her whisper about her judge friend, about how easy it would be to prove I was unfit. My daughters were 9 and 7 now, but I still saw them at 6 and 4, playing with their mashed potatoes while their grandmother planned to steal them. I called Faye at 7 in the morning, asked if she had any emergency slots. She told me to come in at 10. Faye's office smelled like lavender and had soft gray walls that were supposed to be calming. I sat in the chair I'd sat in dozens of times over the past 3 years, told her about Paul's death, about Layla's request, about the nightmares I'd been having where I came home and the girls were gone, where Layla had used her money and connections exactly like she'd threatened. Faye leaned forward, asked me what I was afraid of right now, in this moment, not 3 years ago. I said I was afraid of making the wrong choice, of letting Layla win somehow. Faye said I needed to hear something. Layla couldn't win. I held all the power now. The trust couldn't move without me. The courts had already rejected Layla's claims about my fitness. I'd built a stable life for my daughters. I wasn't the scared young mother anymore who Layla had threatened at Thanksgiving. Faye asked me what I actually wanted from this situation. Not what I wanted to prevent, what I wanted to create. I didn't have an answer. The email came Tuesday morning, from someone named Dmitry Kozlov, attorney representing Elias Swain. Elias wanted to meet with me, to discuss the trust situation, to explain his perspective before the hearing. The email was professional, respectful. Said Elias understood this was a difficult time, that he'd appreciate the chance to speak with me directly, no pressure, just coffee at a neutral location if I was willing. I stared at the message for 10 minutes. This felt calculated, timed perfectly to catch me while I was still deciding. But I was curious, wanted to hear what he'd say, wanted to understand what he'd actually do with the money. I replied yes. Thursday afternoon, the coffee shop on 5th Street near my office. Elias looked tired when he walked in, older than his photo on the website. He ordered black coffee, sat across from me in the booth by the window, thanked me for meeting him, said he knew this whole situation was awkward, that Paul's death had created complications nobody wanted. I asked him directly what he planned to do with the trust if he got control. He didn't hesitate, said he wanted to create treatment programs in Paul's name. 3 full scholarships every year for people who couldn't afford rehab. Funding for a recovery center here in the city. Turn the family money into something that actually helped people instead of just sitting in Layla's investment accounts. I asked why he cared so much about addiction treatment. He said he'd watched Layla enable Paul's drinking for years. Watched her pretend everything was fine because admitting her son had a problem would damage her perfect family image. Watched her pay off Paul's DUIs. Cover for him when he showed up drunk to family events. Give him money when he should have been in treatment. She'd rather have a dead son than admit she'd raised someone who needed help. His voice didn't shake when he said it. Just flat truth. I asked if he'd tried to get Paul into treatment. He said yes, multiple times. But Layla always interfered. Said Paul just needed time. Said the family didn't air their problems to strangers. Said real mothers protected their sons. Elias stopped trying after Paul's third DUI, stopped going to family events, started his nonprofit instead, helped other people's sons and daughters since he couldn't help his own cousin. I was in a meeting Wednesday afternoon when my assistant knocked, said there was a family emergency. Someone claiming to be the girl's grandmother was in the lobby. My stomach dropped. I walked out to find Layla standing by the reception desk, dressed in black, face carefully made up to look grief-stricken. She saw me and rushed over, started talking loudly about how worried she was, how she'd been calling and calling, how she just needed to know the girls were okay. How could I keep her from her grandchildren during this terrible time? The receptionist looked uncomfortable. Other people were staring. I told Layla quietly that this wasn't appropriate, that she needed to leave. She raised her voice more, said I was being cruel, that she'd lost her son and now I was taking her grandchildren too, that all she wanted was to see them, to make sure they were all right. My HR director came out of her office, asked if everything was okay. I said Layla was leaving. Layla grabbed my arm, said we were family, said I owed her this much. The HR director stepped between us, told Layla she needed to exit the building immediately or security would be called. Layla's face changed. The grief disappeared. She looked at me with pure calculation. Said I'd regret this. That the judge would hear about how I'd kept a grieving grandmother away, how I'd had her thrown out of my workplace. Then she turned and walked out. My hands were shaking. The HR director asked if I needed to file a report. I said yes. The certified letter arrived Friday, from Layla's attorney. I opened it at my kitchen table after the girls went to the school. The language was careful, professional. Said Layla wanted to resolve this matter amicably, that she recognized my time and consideration were valuable, that she was prepared to offer compensation of $1 million in exchange for my testimony, supporting her fitness as a grandmother and trustee. In exchange for my statement that Paul had wanted his mother to control the trust. The letter never used the word bribe. Called it compensation for my time, recognition of my important role in the family, partnership in preserving Paul's legacy. I read it 3 times. $1 million to lie under oath. To say Layla had been devoted. To say she'd put the girls first. To save the woman who'd threatened to take my children. The girls came home upset Monday afternoon. My 9-year-old's backpack was stuffed with boxes. American Girl dolls. The expensive kind that cost $200 each. One for her, one for her sister. Cards attached saying, "Love Grandma." My 7-year-old was crying, said her friends kept asking why Grandma sent presents to the school. Why they never talked about Grandma. Why Grandma didn't come to soccer games or school plays. The teacher had pulled my 9-year-old aside, asked if everything was okay at home, if there were family problems she needed to know about. I sat both girls down, asked them how the presents made them feel. My 9-year-old said confused. My 7-year-old said scared. They remembered when I'd told them Grandma couldn't come around anymore. Remembered the fights, the police at the school. Now Grandma was everywhere again, sending things, calling, showing up. They didn't understand what was happening. I realized what Layla was doing, creating the appearance of a loving relationship, making it look like she was trying, like I was the one keeping them apart, building her case even now. Caroline called Tuesday morning, said I needed to make a decision. The trust hearing was scheduled for next week, 10 days from now. She walked me through the scenarios. If I testified truthfully about Layla's threats and harassment, Elias would likely win control. The judge would see Layla's pattern of using money and connections to manipulate people, her inability to respect boundaries, her enabling of Paul's addiction. But if I refused to testify at all, the outcome became less predictable. The judge might rule based purely on the documentation both sides provided, might split control somehow, might delay the decision for months while ordering more investigations. Caroline said the cleanest path was the truth. Let the judge hear what Layla had actually done. Let the documentation speak for itself. Then the decision would be based on facts instead of my silence. I pulled the custody battle box from the back of my closet that night after the girls went to bed. The cardboard was worn at the edges from 3 years of sitting there. I hadn't opened it since the judge ruled in my favor. Didn't need to. Everything inside represented the worst year of my life. I lifted the lid and saw the stack of papers Caroline had organized for court. Layla's letter to the family court judge sat on top. I picked it up and started reading. She'd written 3 full pages about my unfitness as a mother, how I prioritized career over children, how I left them with babysitters instead of being home, how I fed them processed foods and let them watch too much television, how I was too young and immature to understand what children really needed, how Paul had expressed concerns about my parenting, but felt helpless to intervene. Every line was designed to make me look dangerous, neglectful, unfit. I flipped to the next document, her statement to Child Services. She'd called them twice with anonymous tips. But Caroline had subpoenaed the phone records and proven it was her. The investigator's notes showed Layla had claimed I left the girls alone for hours, that strange men came to the house, that I gave them medicine when they weren't sick. All lies. Every single word. But she'd said them under oath. Put them in official documents. Tried to use the system to steal my children. I found the photos she'd submitted. My 6-year-old with chocolate on her face. My 4-year-old wearing mismatched socks. Pictures taken through my kitchen window showing dishes in the sink. A shot of my car with a dent in the bumper. Her evidence of my unfitness. I remembered sitting in Caroline's office looking at these same photos. Crying because someone had been watching my house. Taking pictures of my babies to use against me. Caroline had told me it was harassment. That judges saw through this kind of behavior. That Layla was destroying her own case with her obsession. But I'd been terrified anyway. Because Layla had money. Had connections. Had that judge friend she'd mentioned at Thanksgiving. The anger came back exactly like it had 3 years ago. Hot and sharp in my chest. This woman had tried to take everything from me. Had weaponized the legal system against a working mother. Had turned normal life into evidence of neglect. And now she wanted me to save her. To lie for her. To pretend she'd been devoted and loving. I put the papers back in the box and closed the lid. Then I called Faye's emergency line. She called me back within 20 minutes. I told her I'd been going through the custody documents. That I couldn't stop thinking about what Layla had done. Faye listened without interrupting. Then she asked me what I was feeling. I said anger. Rage. The same fury I'd felt sitting in court while Layla's lawyer questioned my fitness as a mother. Faye let me talk for a while. Then she said something that stopped me. She asked me to think about the difference between revenge and justice. I said they felt like the same thing right now. She said revenge was about making Layla suffer. About using my power to hurt her the way she'd hurt me. But justice was about preventing her from having power to harm others. About protecting future people from her manipulation. She asked me what I would want if Layla had never threatened me. If I was just a neutral person deciding what was best for Paul's memory and the girl's future. If I didn't have all this history. I didn't have an answer. Faye said I didn't need one tonight. But she wanted me to sit with that question. To separate my justified anger from the actual decision I needed to make. She reminded me that I'd spent 3 years building a life where Layla couldn't touch us. Where my daughters thrived without her interference. She asked if I wanted to spend my energy on revenge or on protecting what I'd built. I told her I'd think about it. But I didn't sleep much that night. The school counselor called Thursday morning while I was at work. She said she needed to discuss some concerns about the girls. My stomach dropped. I asked if they were okay. She said physically yes. But both of them were showing signs of stress and confusion. My 9-year-old had been withdrawn in class. Wasn't participating like usual. Had started crying during reading time when the class discussed a story about a grandmother. My 7-year-old had gotten into an argument with another student about families. Had insisted that grandmothers were mean and dangerous. The teacher had pulled her aside to talk and she'd refused to explain. The counselor said she knew about Paul's recent death. She was sorry for our loss. But she wanted to make sure the girls had the support they needed during this difficult time. She'd noticed that presents kept arriving at the school addressed to them from their grandmother. That other students had been asking questions about why they never talked about her. Why she sent gifts to the school instead of their house. I explained briefly that Layla and I had a complicated history. That there were boundaries in place for good reasons. The counselor said she understood. But she gently suggested that the girls needed stability and clarity right now. That being caught in the middle of adult conflicts was adding to their stress about losing their father. That whatever was happening with Layla needed to be resolved one way or another, because the uncertainty was affecting them at the school. I thanked her and said I was working on it. Then I sat at my desk staring at my computer screen for 20 minutes. My daughters remembered Layla's threats. They were scared she was trying again. And I was so focused on my own anger that I hadn't noticed how this was affecting them. I picked the girls up from the school early that afternoon. Told my boss I had a family situation. We went home and I made their favorite dinner. Chicken nuggets and mac and cheese. Nothing fancy, just comfort food. While we ate, I brought up Grandma Layla. My 9-year-old immediately tensed, put down her fork and stared at her plate. My 7-year-old asked if we had to talk about her. I said yes, but I promised it would be okay. I explained in simple terms that Grandma and I were working out some grown-up business about money that Daddy left behind. That it was complicated, but we were figuring it out. That sometimes adults have to make hard decisions about family stuff. My 9-year-old looked up at me. Her eyes were scared. She asked if Grandma was trying to take us away again. My chest hurt. I'd thought they were too young to remember clearly. That time had blurred the details. But my daughter remembered. Remembered being 6 years old and hearing her grandmother say she could take them anytime. Remembered the tension, the fights, the police at the school. I reached across the table and took her hand. I told her no. That would never happen. That I was their mom and nobody could change that. That the judge had already decided years ago. My 7-year-old asked why Grandma kept sending presents. Why she called all the time. Why she showed up places. I said Grandma was sad about losing Daddy. That she was trying to feel close to you. But that didn't mean anything was going to change with our family. My 9-year-old asked what the money thing was about. I kept it simple. Said Daddy's grandfather had left money for the family. That different people had ideas about what to do with it. That Grandma wanted my help with something. That I was deciding what was right. She asked if I was going to help Grandma. I said I was still thinking about it. But whatever I decided, it wouldn't change anything about our life. About our house. About us being together. Both girls seemed to relax a little. We finished dinner and watched a movie together. But I kept thinking about my 9-year-old's question. About what message I was sending them with whatever choice I made. Dimitri's email arrived Friday morning. The subject line said, "Trust proposal details." I opened it during my lunch break. The attachment was 15 pages long. Detailed financial projections, program descriptions, implementation timelines. Elias had clearly spent serious time on this. The proposal outlined 3 addiction treatment scholarships in Paul's name. Full funding for people who couldn't afford rehab. Priority given to parents with young children. Because Paul had been a father. Because his addiction had affected his kids. The second part covered funding for a recovery center in our city. Not a luxury facility. A real treatment program for people without insurance or resources. Evidence-based care, long-term support, family counseling. The third section addressed the girls' inheritance. Elias proposed setting up protected trusts that neither he nor Layla could touch. The money would go directly to them when they turned 25. With distributions for college before that, professional management, court oversight, everything designed to ensure Paul's daughters actually benefited from their grandfather's money. I read through the budget breakdowns, the program details, the oversight structures. This wasn't just talk. This was a real plan to turn family money into something that helped people. That addressed the actual problem that killed Paul. I thought about what Layla would do with the same money. Country club dues, luxury vacations, maybe some donations to causes that came with naming opportunities. Nothing that would actually help anyone. Nothing that honored Paul's memory in any meaningful way. Just more money for someone who already had plenty. I forwarded the proposal to Caroline, asked her if this kind of plan was legally viable, if Elias could actually do what he was proposing. She called me an hour later, said yes, said it was actually brilliant. Said the judge would likely love seeing the money used for public good instead of private wealth. Said it showed Elias understood the responsibility of controlling a family trust. My phone rang at 11 that night. I almost didn't answer. Unknown number. But something made me pick up. It was Layla. She was crying. Actual sobbing on the phone. She said she was going to lose everything, that Paul's grandfather had put conditions in the trust she couldn't meet without my help, that her financial situation wasn't what people thought, that she'd made mistakes with money over the years, that she needed this trust to stay secure. I didn't say anything, just listened. She said she knew she'd made mistakes with me, that she'd been too protective, too controlling, that she'd gone too far, but she'd only wanted what was best for her grandchildren. She'd seen me struggling as a young mother, seen Paul not stepping up, seen my babies needing more stability. She'd thought she could provide that. She admitted she'd handled it wrong, that she'd let her fear for the girls turn into something ugly, that she'd crossed lines she shouldn't have crossed. But she was desperate now. She needed me to understand. Without my testimony, Elias would win. He'd take control of everything. And she'd be left with nothing but the house and her debts. She was 63 years old. She couldn't start over. This trust was supposed to be her security, her future. Paul's grandfather had wanted her taken care of, but the conditions required family support, required the guardian of Paul's children to agree she was fit. She was begging me, actually begging, saying she'd do anything, that she'd stay away from the girls if that's what I wanted, that she'd sign papers, make promises, whatever it took. Just please, please help her. I asked if she remembered Thanksgiving dinner 6 years ago, when she told me she could take my children whenever she wanted. There was silence. Then she said yes. She remembered. I asked if she remembered calling child services, lying about me, taking pictures through my windows, trying to build a case to prove I was unfit. More silence. Then she said she'd been scared for the girls, that she'd thought she was protecting them. I told her I'd think about what she said. Then I hung up. I sat in the dark living room for a long time after that. Listening to her cry had felt strange, like seeing someone powerful suddenly become small. But I didn't feel satisfied, didn't feel vindicated, just tired. I didn't sleep. Lay in bed staring at the ceiling thinking about everything. About Layla's threats. About the girls' scared faces at dinner. About Elias's proposal to help people. About Paul dying alone at 38 because nobody had forced him to face his addiction. About what kind of person I wanted to be now that I had power over someone who'd tried to destroy me. Faye's question kept coming back. What would I want if Layla had never threatened me? If I was just deciding what was best for Paul's memory and the girl's future? The answer seemed obvious when I stripped away the anger. I'd want the money to do something good. To help people struggling with addiction like Paul had. To give my daughters their inheritance without strings attached. To honor Paul's memory in a way that acknowledged his real struggles instead of pretending he'd been something he wasn't. I'd want justice. Real justice. Not revenge. Not making Layla suffer just because I could. But actually preventing her from having power to manipulate and control people. From using money as a weapon. From enabling addiction and calling it love. I thought about my daughters watching me make this decision. About what I was teaching them. That you hurt people back when they hurt you? That revenge is justified if someone deserves it? Or that you tell the truth even when lying would benefit you? That you choose what's right over what feels good? That having power over someone doesn't mean you have to use it cruelly? I realized around 3 a.m. that my decision wasn't really about Layla at all anymore. It was about who I wanted to be. About what example I wanted to set. About what I could live with when this was over. And I couldn't live with lying under oath to save someone who'd tried to steal my children. No matter how much she cried, no matter how desperate she was. Because the truth mattered. Because justice mattered. Because my daughters were watching. I called Caroline at 8 the next morning, told her I'd made my decision. She asked what I wanted to do. I said I would testify at the hearing, and I would tell the complete truth about my history with Layla, about her Thanksgiving threat to take my children, about her harassment through child services and the school, about her attempts to undermine me as a mother, about her pattern of using wealth and connections as weapons, about everything. Caroline was quiet for a moment. Then she said that was probably the right choice, that the judge deserved to know who was asking for control of this money, that my testimony would likely result in Elias gaining control of the trust. I said good, that his proposal would actually help people, that it would create something meaningful from Paul's death instead of just enriching someone who was already comfortable. Caroline said she'd notify the court I was willing to testify, that I should expect a call from both sides, that Layla's attorney would try to prepare me, try to shape my testimony. I told her I wouldn't talk to anyone except her, that I'd show up and tell the truth. That's all. She said she'd handle it. Then she asked if I was sure. If I understood I was basically ending any possibility of a relationship with Layla. I said yes, I understood, and I was okay with that. Because some relationships aren't worth preserving. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I took the day off work, wore a simple black dress. Nothing fancy, just professional and respectful. Caroline met me outside the courthouse. She'd brought copies of all the documentation from our custody case. The letters, the photos, the child services reports, the school incident reports, everything organized in a thick binder. She said Layla's attorney had tried to get my testimony excluded, claimed I was biased, that I had a grudge. But the judge had ruled that as the guardian of Paul's children, my perspective was directly relevant to the trust question. We went inside. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Layla sat at one table with her attorney. Elias sat at another with Dimitri. There were a few other people I didn't recognize, probably family members or trust administrators. Layla looked at me when I walked in. Her face was pale, eyes red like she'd been crying. She looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow. The judge called the hearing to order, explained the matter before the court, the dispute over trust administration, the question of fitness and judgment. Then he called me to the stand. I walked up and took the oath, swore to tell the truth. The judge asked me to state my relationship to the deceased and to the parties involved. I explained that Paul had been my ex-husband, that Layla was his mother and my former mother-in-law, that I was the guardian of Paul's children, my daughters, ages 9 and 7. Layla's attorney stood up. He was an older man in an expensive suit. He asked me to describe my relationship with Layla. I took a breath. Then I started talking. I told him about Thanksgiving dinner 6 years ago. About Layla leaning across the table and whispering that she could take my children whenever she wanted. That she had the money and lawyers to prove I was unfit. That one phone call to her judge friend would start custody proceedings. I described how she'd documented everything after that. Photos of messy faces, notes about being late, questions to my daughters designed to make me sound neglectful. The attorney tried to interrupt, said that was hearsay. Old history. The judge told him to let me finish. I continued. Told the court about the custody battle 3 years ago, how Layla had submitted a letter calling me unfit, how she'd called child services with false reports, how she'd taken pictures through my windows, how she'd shown up at the school and caused scenes, how every investigation had come back unfounded, how she'd been banned from the school property after her behavior at the spring concert. I pulled out the documentation Caroline had brought, handed it to the judge. He looked through it while I talked. The attorney tried again. Asked if I was aware that grandparents often struggle with boundaries during family transitions, if I'd considered that Layla's behavior came from a place of love and concern. I looked at him directly, said yes, I'd considered that. But love doesn't threaten to steal children. Concern doesn't file false reports with child services. Care doesn't take photos through windows to use as evidence. The judge asked Layla's attorney to sit down. Then he turned to me. Asked me directly whether I believed Layla should control the trust. I looked at Layla. She was crying again, hands clasped together, looking at me like I could save her. I thought about everything she'd done, everything she'd tried to take from me. And I thought about my daughters, about what I was teaching them right now. I turned back to the judge. Said honestly that I believed Layla would use the money to continue trying to control people rather than honoring Paul's memory. That she'd spent years using wealth and connections as weapons against me. That she'd enabled Paul's drinking instead of getting him help because admitting he had a problem would damage her perfect family image. That giving her control of millions of dollars would just give her more power to manipulate and harm. I said that Elias's proposal to fund addiction treatment would actually help people, would create something positive from a family tragedy, would honor Paul in a way that acknowledged who he really was and what he really struggled with. That my daughters would receive their inheritance without anyone controlling it or using it against them. That this was about more than money. It was about whether wealth should be used to help people or control them. The judge's decision came 3 days later. Caroline called me at work with the news. Elias would serve as trustee with court oversight. The ruling cited Layla's pattern of using money to manipulate family members, her inability to acknowledge Paul's addiction issues. The girls would receive their inheritance directly when they turned 25. No control by Layla or Elias, just theirs when they were old enough to handle it responsibly. I sat at my desk staring at the email Caroline sent with the court documents. Layla had lost. Not because I destroyed her, because the judge saw exactly who she was based on facts and evidence. That evening, I sat down with the girls at our kitchen table. They were doing homework, math problems and spelling words, normal kid stuff. I waited until they finished before I started talking, told them the judge made a decision about the money their daddy left behind, that Uncle Elias would take care of it for now. Some of it would help people who were sick the way their daddy was. People who needed treatment and couldn't afford it. My 9-year-old looked up from her worksheet, asked if Grandma Layla was going to try to take us away again. I reached across the table and took her hand, told her no. That wouldn't happen. The judge made sure of it. She nodded slowly, went back to her spelling words like we'd just discussed what was for dinner. My 7-year-old asked if we could get ice cream to celebrate. I said yes. We drove to the place downtown with the good chocolate chip. Sat in a booth by the window. They talked about their soccer game that weekend, about the book report due next Friday, about everything except courts and judges and dead fathers. 2 weeks later, Caroline called again. Layla's attorney had contacted her about visitation arrangements, formal ones with boundaries and court supervision. Layla was finally accepting that she needed to respect limits. Caroline asked what I wanted to do. I thought about my daughters, about them growing up without knowing their grandmother at all, about what that would teach them. I agreed to supervised visits once a month. Neutral location, clear rules about what Layla could and couldn't say, a chance for the girls to know her within safe limits. The first visit happened at a family center downtown. A counselor sat in the room the whole time. Layla brought coloring books and crayons, kept her voice gentle, asked about school and soccer, didn't mention money or big houses or how much better life could be somewhere else. The girls were cautious at first, but they warmed up slowly. 2 months passed. The visits continued. The girls seemed okay with them. Elias started the scholarship fund in Paul's name. 3 students would get treatment coverage every year. Real help for people who needed it. I slept better at night knowing I'd made my decision based on truth instead of fear. Not revenge, just honesty about what happened and what Layla had done. The girls were adjusting well, doing great in the school, happy with their friends and their activities. Layla stayed within the boundaries now. Didn't push, didn't threaten, didn't try to undermine me during the supervised visits. I'd proven something to myself, that having power over someone who hurt me didn't mean I had to use it cruelly. Life wasn't perfect, but I'd built something stable for my daughters and myself. Something based on truth and hard work, and refusing to let anyone make me feel small. Nobody could take that away from us. Not Layla, not anyone.